All right. Good morning, Doug. We have a number of things to talk about today, starting with these woke corporations and what they're doing. Everyone knows about the Bud Light ad, with Dylan Mulvaney recently, but there's more than just Bud Light, it seems.
Yes, there is. Unbelievably, amazingly, idiotically, Miller followed up with its own ad where it has a not terribly good looking, kind of average looking chick. You don't
want to presume.
Excuse, yeah. I presume it was someone of the female persuasion, but you can't really be totally sure these days. Talking about how women have a lot more to do with beer than being swimsuit models while you're making beer commercials. And she hammers on about all this stuff. Well, the fact is that beer is the type of thing that men drink in bars. Women are not beer drinkers. Women tend to be wine drinkers or fruity drinkers. They're not beer drinkers. So she's yammering on about how Miller, I don't know what her bottom line was. I guess she was making a statement, not telling me that Miller beer is better. Well, maybe it is, because she's saying that now women are brewing beer. Do you remember the exact content of that commercial, other than being purposefully offensive to beer drinkers?
Well, I think that's the primary point, is that they were just wanted to, they definitely were, it was less direct than the Dylan Mulvaney one, though, it wasn't like something that was necessarily so in your face offensive like that has been to people. But it's on the heels of that, it's surprising that, these ad people would run with this, because, essentially it's basically trying to educate men on the real history of beer. And that women's role in it.
Yes. Well, all of this nonsense, I think it started out with Gillette lining up a bunch of white males barbecuing, and then proceeded to give them a lecture about how they shouldn't act like white males or something like that.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah, exactly. So I was so offended by this that when I saw it, I happened to be in Las Vegas at the time. And I said, to hell with these people. I needed a new razor. I used to use, these throwaway blue Bics or Gillettes. I think they were Gillettes.
Yeah.
That you throw away after a few shaves. And so I went down to the store that they have in the Las Vegas hotel where you can buy stuff like that. And they were all out of those. And the only razors they were selling, they probably weren't out of them. It's Vegas, so they only sell really expensive stuff. So I bought a Bic 5-blade razor, and it cost me like $2 for $15. I said, this is ridiculous. But rather than go out and search, I don't want to buy Gillette's product anymore. So I bought and actually it did me good, because it turns out, believe it or not, I may have mentioned this. I mentioned this to anybody that wants to talk about razors with me. It's that those 5-blade razors, which I thought were just a marketing scam, they're unbelievable. One of them will last a year. Amazing. And the one I bought lasted so long and continued giving such wonderful clean shaves. And I said, I've got to see how long this thing lasts. I mean, and it lasted about a year and a half until it started degrading a little bit. And I said, wait a minute, I don't need to prove anything on my own face. And then I used the second razor that came in the pack. So indirectly, that ridiculous Gillette ad did me some good and got me off of Gillette's products for good. I don't buy their product anymore because I found a better one that Bic makes. I suppose Gillette has a 5-blade razor.
Yeah,
but
they do.
All these corporations are totally woke at this point, all of them. And then
yeah, let me show you the other one real quick. Let me actually bring up, because I was on. It's just interesting to see. Hold on one second. Yeah, this, if people probably saw this. This is the Ford ad for the new F-150. So I'm just going to skip ahead just because it's to the important part. Basically, there's a bunch of dirty trucks off-roading, but then they get clean. And it's a new pride flag. So, which, incorporates trans and then all the other stuff. So anyway, that's Ford. Now, I find that shocking. I don't see how they're going to sell more trucks. I mean, what's the market? How much percentage of the population? If every, LGBTQ plus whatever person, instead of driving a Toyota Prius or Subaru, decided to buy a Ford Raptor, what's the maximum amount of these things they could sell? I don't think it's that big.
I'd say maybe 10 or 15 trucks nationwide, something very small like that. So they're trying to make a statement. That's what's obviously going on here. But it's so stupid because the kind of people that buy Ford F-150s are going to think twice about it because they don't want to support people that support values that are antithetical to their own.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's the odd macho man that says, hey, I'm secure in my masculinity and I like these gay colors and, screw them. Well, okay, I can understand that. But, we're talking about the law of large numbers. So who are these advertising people that are coming up with these crazy ideas? And who are the corporate suits that are allowing this to go by? Because it's been a scandal now for several years and they're still doing it. Well,
right.
Speaking for myself, and I am not a consumer. I mean, I have everything I want. I don't go out and buy stuff, but I'm not going to buy their products just to make a moral statement, even though it'll have about zero effect on their balance sheets or income statements, whether I buy it or not.
Right. It makes no difference, but it does. But when you push people too far, they get really offended and then they're like, screw it, I don't care. And that's what you see with the Bud Light sales. I mean, I saw a picture of cases of Bud Light cans being sold in Walmart stores, a case of beer for $1.78, which is something like 7 cents a beer. Is that right? No, can't be that much. It's more than that, but it's less than a quarter of beer for sure. And they're not selling.
No, you just can't give it away. I mean, well, that's a good thing because usually boycotts come from the direction of people like many years ago, Cesar Chavez with the California grape pickers, had people boycott grapes because they didn't feel like they were getting enough money. Right. Well, if you come up from Mexico to pick grapes and you're not getting enough money, then maybe you shouldn't come up and work for.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's one theory.
Hey, to just quit picking grapes instead of complaining about it. But no, this is a trend, and part of it, from a corporate point of view, is the people. And I don't know if we've talked about this before, but the people that run corporations today are suits that got into the positions that they are in because they're good at politicking, backslapping and backstabbing and smiling. And they've almost all risen to their Peter's principle level of incompetence. It seems to me, people that run the great corporations of America, they're not founding entrepreneurs. So
yeah, it's credentialism, if nothing else. That's credentialism with them. I think, they have the degrees from the right places. They have the right MBAs, that kind of thing. But
that's part of it. Yeah.
The thing that's interesting to me is with these, that we've had so many of them on the heels of one another. You had the Bud Light, then the Miller Lite, and now the Ford one. This is all within, I don't know, maybe it's 5 weeks. Like it seems like it's a trend that is accelerating. And I wonder if it seems when they've been really bad blowback, like at Bud Light, that they have started to try and respond to it a little bit. Budweiser has, But you got to wonder if maybe they really didn't think that that this social signaling or that these would have a negative business effect. Maybe they're so used to boycotts on the right or whatever, never being effective at all, because the people on the right are not motivated generally by social causes or do-gooderness. They're not motivated by that. So they never really worked, and they felt like they could just get away with all this without they must have seen it as a costless thing, because I still don't imagine it could survive the corporate environment if they thought it was going to be so damaging to business.
Well, on the one hand, ESG has been imposed from where, I'm not entirely sure, on all corporations now. And diversity, inclusion, and equity have been imposed on corporations from where, I'm not entirely sure, but they're enforced now because mutual funds and hedge funds and can't buy their stock unless they have a statement that say that they approve of all these things. So it's maybe they feel that this is part of the pattern to make themselves seem righteous to the powers that be. I don't know, but I think the average guy and a lot of women in the US are saying, enough is enough. I'm taking this seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, it's too bad that I don't buy a Ford F-50 every year because I would stop. But to hell with Miller Beer, and to hell with Budweiser, and to hell with Gillette. But all the corporations are that way. I mean, you scratch the surface and everything but My Pillow there is woke, it seems.
It does seem like that's true. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me. I wonder what the difference is, why people are motivated so much by why it crossed the line finally, for people, for consumers, where before it never did. And maybe because it's just feels like a personal attack on brands that people personally identified with. I mean, I think that's true about Light. People who drink Bud Light will not drink Miller Lite, at least historically. You know what I mean? They would not
For
want
some
it. They were
reason, right.
They were
But
one or the
you
other.
know what? People have brand loyalty for some reason I'm not too sure of, just like people have loyalty to the home team of whatever city they're in for football or basketball or whatever, baseball. These are just mercenaries that are hired for salaries and put this logo on there when they play ball. I mean, this is all crazy to me, but I think people that take this seriously, and I think most people do take it seriously, they like to be loyal to something. It gives meaning to their lives in some ways. They feel betrayed by something that they've given their loyalty to, and they're pissed off, and they can see what's generally going on in society, and maybe they don't understand it, and maybe it's taken them a while to figure out what's going on. But I think the average guy has finally started to figure this out, and he doesn't like it. And it's part of the bifurcation in America. We've got two countries that, represented by places like New York and California on the one hand, and Texas and Florida and North Dakota on the other hand. And people are moving from one to the other to be with the people that they more or less agree with. So, some years ago, we talked about civil war and the prospects for it in the US. Well, I hope it's a kinder and gentler type of civil war, just a secession that breaks off. But especially with the US government being manifestly bankrupt now, as evidenced by their inability to, they can't even pay the interest on the debt. But of course, they'll continue to pay the congressmen and senators and White House employees' salaries. That's sacrosanct.
Yeah, I mean, come on, they're what do they call it? Essential services. Yeah, they're
essential services.
Yeah.
People are starting to ask themselves this question a little bit more often these days. So, but there's something else that ties in with this, and that is in California, Gavin Newsom. is he the worst governor that's ever existed in one of the 50 US states? I don't know, maybe. He's in contention for it, certainly. And he appointed a committee, I hope I'm getting this right, with 8 Black people and a token Oriental, that this commission was to determine what just reparations are for people of color.
Well, descendants of slaves, though, right? Specifically descendants of slaves, wasn't it?
Oh, is that it? What was an Oriental doing on the panel then? They were never
Well,
slaves.
to provide some objectivity, I think.
A little bit
I'm
of
just-
outside influence to show that it wasn't just a scam being run by
Exactly, maybe, yeah.
ex-slaves. Right.
Yeah. No, but I mean, not the people on the panel, but the people who receive the reparations, they have to be, I think they have to be descendants of slaves.
Hmm.
Isn't that the idea?
Well,
How they
I
prove
think,
it out.
I think we're all descendants of slaves, because throughout the world, slavery has been a common practice, and it's still a common practice. And I think I pointed out before that the last country in the world to officially abolish slavery was Mauritania in 1985.
Wow.
So, but there are in reality slaves everywhere. Not everywhere, but in certain stratum of society and in certain countries, yeah, slavery exists, if not by law, as a de facto thing, not a de jure thing. Anyway, this panel, I think they came up with $1.2 million per Black person, but then the whole thing is ridiculous to start with. I mean, what if there's never been slavery in California? What if somebody, how do you prove these things? Does it mean all Black people, or how do you prove these things? What about somebody that's half Black? Does the white mother pay to the Black father and a quarter to the? It's all completely, it's bizarrely insane. But this is actually going on.
So basically the panel said it's a good idea, but it hasn't yet passed. I guess it's got to go through the California Assembly or something, or how does it, what's the next step with it becoming active?
Well, what is the next step with it? It'll never be a law because it's impossible to do it. Forget about stupid and immoral.
So you think it's like you think it's like an Overton window kind of a thing, maybe, just expanding, putting it as a possibility on the table in a way that feels more real to the potential recipients than before? Because it's been talked about for a long time, but talking about now and talking about over $1 million, like, I mean, that encourages the racial divide in the US, doesn't it?
Well, they've come up with a specific number. I think the specific number that they arrived at was 1.2 million, as I recall. So that's kind of giving a reality to the fantasy that a commission authorized and set up by the government has come up with a specific number. So that's a pretty real negotiating chip. And maybe some other goofy state governor will do the same thing. And well, this all ties into the trend of guaranteed annual income, which is kind of welfare for all. And I think that's going to be on its way. Maybe Blacks will get a little bit more guaranteed annual income, but
or maybe they would just get it. Maybe they'd get it first, in an effort to do the reparations. Maybe they say that they start there, and then for equity it gets expanded.
Yeah, you gotta kind of move in the right direction. And this is one of the things, symbolic perhaps, but one of those things. So, and most people don't know the details. I'm not interested in knowing the details because it's like getting 9 crazy people around and having them come up with something. I don't really care what they come up with. But the fact that they've been authorized by some duly appointed authority to do this tells you, and the average guy who quite justifiably doesn't pay any attention to this except to hear that something like this has happened, it's going to piss him off. He says, where's my $1.2 million? Or aren't I going to have to pay part of that $1.2 million? This is creating more divisiveness and race hatred in the US.
Right.
Because from a racial point of view, birds of a feather do flock together. But things were getting pretty mellow, I think, between the various racial and ethnic groups in the US. And these people have purposely lit a fire under a potentially explosive mixture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from a white person's perspective, it's like, it seems like it's an absolute injustice to punish you and reward, especially, and like, that's a big number and it's so specific, the 1.2 million,
That's right.
that
It's specific. It must be real. There must be like facts that they've crunched, numbers.
Right. Yeah. And for anybody who is not, who, according to these ideas, is not entitled to it, it feels like an injustice that I have to pay for it, or that I don't receive it and they do. And, so it feels like an injustice on the, for white Americans. And then for Black Americans, it sounds like there's an agreed, formulated scientific understanding of what they're entitled to. And yes, they're right. They were entitled to something. It turns out it's a lot. Turns out it's change of life money.
Yeah, it's actually criminal. And furthermore, they talk about Gavin Newsom as a potential Democratic candidate if Joe Biden doesn't run, or God knows what happens. Because God forbid anything happens to Joe Biden at the wrong time and you have Kamala Harris as the president. But on the bright side, Kamala has been appointed the czar of artificial intelligence. And it's kind of makes sense, because obviously Kamala's been fighting the threat presented by intelligence all of her public life. So
it's actually crazy. I mean,
no, it's crazy.
What are they trying to?
This is Babylon B territory, where they
It's like they're trolling us with it, they're just like, who's the least intelligent person we have public facing that we could put out there to represent the cutting edge of technology and to make sure that AI doesn't dominate humanity and enslave us all.
That's right. Now, these people apparently really do have a sense of humor. It's Black humor. Well, I guess it's Black humor. It wasn't a pun. I mean, that would probably be banned from the vocabulary too, to say that.
Probably.
Anyway,
it's crazy. Well, out of control officials. There's this one, and obviously not another not smart person. I want to show you a short video of this of Chrystia Freeland. She's the if you remember, she is the finance minister for in Canada, and she was the person who engineered the financial attacks or whatever on the Canadian trucker protesters. Well, she has some interesting things to say about how you can unlock value in society. Let me just give me 1 second, bring this up for you. You'll enjoy, you'll get a kick out of this one, I think. All right, here we go.
Right there with this notion of the spending, because you allude to it in your fiscal update. The language seems to me to be important. Smart, targeted. These are words that suggest you want to make very careful, kind of incisive spending on the government's part to get the economy going. What might that look like? Can you give us any detail?
Well, it's great to be with you, Amanda. And I want to thank you, first of all, for really zeroing in on the preloaded stimulus idea. None of us have a crystal ball, but economists like Ben, like Doug, have been pointing out that some Canadian households, and it tends to be the better off households, do have quite a lot of money that they've saved because there hasn't been that much to do in the pandemic. And certainly it would be great if that money could go towards driving our recovery. And I want to make an offer now to all of your listeners. If people have ideas on how the government can act to help unlock that preloaded stimulus, I am very, very interested. Maybe, as Doug Porter was suggesting, it happens by itself. that's the best case scenario for me. But if people have ideas on how we can really, try to unleash that, and particularly unleash it in the parts of the Canadian economy that really need support, tourism, hospitality, domestic services, let me know.
So Doug, do you have any suggestions on what the government could do to unlock the preloaded stimulus in people's savings accounts?
That's the first time I've heard her. And I'd like to take apart her words one by one, but there were at least a half a dozen things that she said that were criminally insane. She said that she wants to unlock the spending, and it's mainly rich people that have, she was implying it was savings or pension funds, and disperse it to poorer areas of the economy. So apparently she's advocating that the government take the savings and capital of richer people and spend it where they want to. There were other things that she said, but the whole thing was actually insane. And she's the finance minister and deputy prime minister of Canada. At least that's
Right.
what Bloomberg says.
Yes, she is. And I mean, it just shows that the vision of what private property is for us, for people like us, for normal people, is very different than the view of private properties government officials have. They see it as like unleveraged assets, like untapped potential, tools to make society more equitable.
That's right. You have that money just sitting there. We want to do something with it that we think is good. Now, of course, they don't understand the basic economics of this type of thing. That capital isn't just sitting there as a pile of $100 bills. It's in an institution. It's sitting there being lent out by banks or being invested in stocks, financing businesses and so forth. But they want to redeploy it in ways that they think are better. And she names some industries that she thinks are
Hospitality.
Exactly. So, which is basically a consumption industry. None of the things she mentioned have anything to do with producing new wealth or inventing something. It's basically consumption. The industries that she mentioned, hospitality and what else? I don't know. Same type of.
She said entertainment. She said domestic services.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, you've got dangerous, crazy people in charge of Canada and in charge of the US, where in Washington, we have the Jacobins that are firmly in office, and they're going to make sure that they stay in office in the elections in 2024, I think, somehow.
Yeah, I think one way or another, it seems like it. It's hard to stop at this point. But I think one of the things with this in particular, it's that she's articulating one of the key benefits of a central bank digital currency. It's like baked into the capabilities of a central bank digital currency, in that it allows these officials to micromanage consumption or spending and savings. If there's too much savings by certain people, then they can encourage them to spend in certain ways with certain parties. And they could do it by implementing negative interest rates, or actually having it so your money, if it's in your bank for more than 12 months, it just expires. So it's no good to you anyway. But this is like one of the greatest attacks on individual sovereignty possible. If they deny your ability to save, nothing will make you more of a slave than denying your ability to improve your lot in life.
It'll really make it impossible for you to get ahead unless you're well connected politically and favored by the political classes. No, it's really, really dangerous. And these central bank digital currencies are coming. It's going to be a dystopian world, not only because it's going to create vast unhappiness and destroy the middle class, which are the only classes which are worth anything. I mean, the lower classes are pure consumers. They're basically
versus producers. They're consumers. They're not
exactly.
Producers. Yeah.
And the people in the upper classes on top, well, they have money and they basically consume too. I mean, it's great having money. It should allow you to consume. But the middle classes are the ones that are going to be squeezed by all this.
How do you, people have asked us in our group file, they've asked us about how do you cope with a situation, where central bank digital currencies are a reality? And I think, first of all, I don't think they can be avoided. I think they're just, I really do think they're inevitable. And I think that they're going to be there. And it's, if, on the way there, society will be cashless, and that too limits your ability to use your savings, for instance, because banks can disallow transactions. They can not allow you to withdraw money. They can do all kinds of things like that. So you can see a path where we're going to get to this, and whether it's next year or 10 years from now, it seems like it's coming. Do you have any ideas how one might cope with it? I mean, just to deal with it, to make sure they aren't totally enslaved by it?
Well, I've been saying for a long time that as dangerous as the financial markets are, to your personal wealth, the political situation is much more dangerous than the financial situation. So you've got to diversify politically, just as you might diversify financially. In the case of an American or a Canadian, or frankly, anybody, it means that you should have a crib, or if you can't, a financial account outside your home country. Now, for Americans, it's very hard. It's not illegal for an American to have a foreign bank or brokerage account, but you won't be able to find a foreign bank or broker that will open an account for you. I mean, it's really rather perverse. It's not illegal, but nobody will open an account for an American anyway. It's too dangerous. It's too costly for a foreign financial institution of any type to do that. So you're already trapped like a lobster in a lobster trap. Look, what you got to do right now is, unless you're already rich enough to be able to break through these barriers, money can solve that problem. You've got to consume less. You've got to produce more. That means taking 2 jobs if you're working, or start an entrepreneurial business on the side. Consume less so you can save more. And you should do your savings, I think, in the form of gold and silver coins that are physically in your own possession. The polar opposite of what central bank digital currencies are about, because it's going to happen. And then the next step is to get a second home abroad, second permanent residency, and preferably a second citizenship abroad. So you can discard the one, which is, because the US citizenship is the only one that taxes you, even if you never step back into the US. And as overreaching as the US government is, you really dare not pay your taxes. They're so powerful.
Yeah, and I think that but in a way, you're relying on maybe hoping another jurisdiction is either more benevolent or weaker in their ability to fully leverage these central bank digital currencies. But I don't see how, to me, in most places will be able to adopt it. I mean, I think here in Uruguay, they'll definitely have one. I mean, I would be really surprised if they didn't have it here also, because it's just technology where most transactions are, everywhere, becoming more and more electronic anyway, so, if you have with that backup jurisdiction, it doesn't free you of the risks of central bank digital currencies, but just maybe increases your optionality.
Well, that's right. But one advantage of smaller third worldish countries is that they rarely have big military budgets. And the problem with a big military budget is it's like a golden hammer. Now that you got it, and it's the only thing that works in your government, you have a tendency to use it. The US is demonstrating that. It's a huge cost and a huge danger at the same time. So that's one advantage. Second thing is that smaller countries tend to not have really big debts, partially because nobody will lend them money. And if the IMF lends the money, well, you can default on the IMF, and most of them will in the future. So they're less risky. Now, the kind of people that go into government are the same type as everywhere. They want to control other people, so they're all dangerous, yes. But look, like Joe Lola said, you can run, but you can't hide. But it's better to have a backup system as opposed to no backup system, even if the backup system may not be the best in the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the approach I've had is I've tried to have things that are in the economy that are pre-money. So produce things that, and maybe you can tell I'm alluding to the cattle operation I have. I'm not saying it's a super probable thing. I hope it will be eventually, but the idea is that I am producing something of value to the market, and I could at least theoretically choose to trade it for the central bank digital currency, whatever the market price is for it, or I could theoretically trade it for other things, maybe gold, maybe Bitcoin, maybe, I don't know, chickens. I don't know, but I mean, you could. So by producing something that is pre-money, then I think that might give me some more options. Am I totally off base with that idea? Or not?
I think you're absolutely correct. Of course, if you have cattle in Venezuela, chances are your herd will have been eaten by even Morlocks by now. I'm not sure what the beef situation is in Venezuela, but I suspect they've mostly been. I don't know what the Venezuelans do for beef, but yes, there's a danger with having visible wealth like cattle. But on the other hand, if you have cattle, you're in a rural area, most of your neighbors have cattle, and that gives you some degree of protection, unless the country as a whole goes insane. But why you don't even have to start with cattle. You can start with a pond, which where you can grow tilapia or other types of fish. I mean, that's a small business that might be sustainable, to use a popular word. You can move up to chickens for eggs and so forth. You can move up to goats, which are easy to maintain. They're almost like pets. So, cattle are kind of like the top of the food chain. But yes, that's a very good idea for lots of reasons, not just economically, but if the things break down, they could be a real plus.
I think the downside of it is you can't go too far up the value chain, and be pre-money, like, be where you are actually can offer a good that didn't require necessarily the currency to produce, but I can trade it for the currency, or I can trade it for other things. You can't go up too far up the value chain, the more sophisticated stuff, like, I don't know. I mean, whether it be financial newsletters or whatever, like you can't, you can't do those higher leverage economic activities and be outside of the money system. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, there's a reason why, I guess, cattle have always been an alternative money. I mean, we say pecuniary comes from the Latin word pecus, which means cattle. They were money in early days. So, I think it's good to have, but perhaps it's not realistic for most people, because in order to have cows, you've got to have land to graze them and feed them. It's tough. So you got to build a certain base of capital before you can even have cattle.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess what I'm trying to get across, if I can, if this is a notion is right at all, is that anything you can do, whether, like you said, the pond with tilapia or the, even chickens. I mean, anything where you are producing something that has a market value today, you could always choose to trade that for whatever the currency is of the day, if that's, the US dollar, or if it's, the Fed coin. But you can trade it for that, but you could also, it has value in and of itself that you are producing and can trade into, you don't need money to produce it. It's producing off of resources that are around you. So it seems like a way you could, because if you're earning your money, if you're an employee and you're on the payroll, you're going to be paid in the central bank digital currency. And if the only way you can produce any value must be originated in the central bank digital currency, it feels like it'd be completely trapped. I guess that's my main point.
Well, you're right. And you're doubly trapped, not just what you said, but you're at the behest of your employer, who
Hmm.
may decide he doesn't need you anymore, or maybe he's unable to employ you. So once again, another argument for being self-employed.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, well, there were a couple of things we talking about. I don't know if we want to get into some of the moral notion or the golden mean idea of having money and too much money, or if you'd rather save that for another day.
Should we talk about that now? Well,
You said you had a philosophical conversation with somebody about, how
yeah,
much money is too much.
yeah, that was interesting. There was a chap that I'd been in communication with, and came over. We had lunch here at my house on the estancia, and we were talking about the value of money. He's a well-to-do guy, and it's occurred to me over time that perhaps there's a golden mean to having money. Now, I've always been of the opinion that more is better of anything that's basically good. And like it should be well known, it's better to be young, healthy, rich, and famous than old, poor, sick, and unknown. Okay, absolutely true. But can you go too far on some of these things? I mean, being too rich and too famous has not treated people in the entertainment business well. So maybe you can have too much money. If you have above a certain amount of money, you feel like you ought to have a bodyguard. I mean, and you're at that point, the money becomes an object in itself. You spend all your time watching the market and making sure your money doesn't disappear, that it isn't stolen or dissipated somehow. It's I wonder, I mean, is there some optimal amount of money? More is always better, but maybe it's a bell-shaped curve from a personal happiness point of view. When you have so much money, at some point, maybe it starts to capture you. I'm not sure.
Well, we had an email conversation with a mutual friend talking about, when you're too famous, certainly, you become a prisoner to kind of the expectations of, if you're an influencer online, for instance, you become a prisoner to your fans in a way, because you need them, and it's like a codependent relationship. And in many ways, it seems to me it's hard to know where the person, what is originally and authentically the person, and how much that person is just reflecting a set of rewards basically that are on offer by a fan base. You know what I mean? Like they accentuate certain traits, and then do they even know what they are anymore? So I think fame is a real risky one. I think that's.
Yeah, it's very risky, because after a while, you start acting in a way that will please your fans.
I mean, you have all the incentive to do that. Yeah.
A lot of incentive to do that. That's right. So having too much money is a potential danger. Having too much fame is a potential danger. Can't have too much health.
No.
And it's better to be young than old and decrepit.
Well,
no question about that. So,
well, have you seen this guy who is basically spending like millions of dollars? He's a founder of a tech company. I think it was Braintree, which is a payment processing company, sold to PayPal. And he is spending his millions of dollars and trying to stay young. And he's become very public about it. Have you seen this guy? I can't remember his name. Look it up.
well, he wouldn't be the first one or the only one, but no, I guess I don't know this chap in particular.
I mean, when you look at it, it looks like there's something wrong with this guy. So in the pursuit, maybe there's nothing wrong with being too healthy, but the unbridled pursuit of health is also, I think, has negative trade-offs. And if you see this guy, you're like, there's something wrong with him. I mean,
You're absolutely right. It's kind of like what the Bible says, which is often misquoted. It's that money isn't the root of all evil. Love of money is the root of all evil. Well, maybe that's true, maybe not. But it's not health that's evil. It's the love of maintaining health. Anyway, you can't fight the second law of thermodynamics. I mean, you can try to ameliorate it, but you can't overcome it. And that sounds like he's trying to fight reality. Well, on the other hand, maybe it is possible to replace cells and this and that and the other thing to maintain stasis so you don't get old. Seems to be physically possible if you keep inputting outside energy to keep the system going. That's how you fight the second law.
I'll send you some videos with this guy, and you tell me if you think he has any psychological aberrations, running loose in his head or not, because it just seems to me he does. But I'll send it to you so you can watch. His name is Brian Johnson.
I hate to, Aristotle was right. He said there was such a thing as the golden mean. In other words, it's a very bad thing to be a coward, but then it's a very bad thing to be foolhardy. These are two sides. So, just commonsensical bravery is kind of in between being a coward and being rashly foolhardy. And perhaps it's that way with everything, whether we're talking about sex, drugs, money, fame, anything. It's you pursue anything to excess, it's going to end badly. There's a certain amount of all these things that you want, but you have too much. So this is a question of wisdom, and what is the golden mean in every area of life? Now, there's nothing wrong with having $100 billion like Gates or Musk or these guys do, but Musk seems to have made he seems to be using that money productively and to enjoy himself. I'm not sure that that's at all true about Gates, who seems much more interested in being a busybody and making other people's lives miserable with his money.
Yeah, exactly. He's there to make people's lives miserable. I think that's true. What do you think? Do you think that then the golden mean, as Aristotle would think of it, do you think that it's a little soft, like what it means exactly, right? It's kind of, but I wonder if also it is sort of subjective by individual, because for instance, maybe somebody like Elon Musk can have like his limit where before money corrupts him is much higher than maybe mine would be. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe that's possible. So there isn't a number that's the right number.
Well, it seems to me that Musk is using his money as a means to an end. And I think part of the proof that Gates is not is that he's engaging in philanthropic activities. And I'm opposed to philanthropic activities. Now, I know most people will argue, oh, that's terrible. You've got to be selfish. You've got to give back. Well, no, you don't give back. When you create wealth, you've already given back. You're being rewarded for having given and created. So this whole concept of giving back is stupid and destructive, just like the concept of philanthropy, which is what Bill Gates says he's all about, is also stupid. If you want to improve the lives of your fellow man, that's fine. But it's a question of how you do it. And throwing money at a problem means that, well, perhaps you're just too money oriented, or you think that money can solve the problems,
or that that no one would voluntarily get on board with what you're trying to do, because the basic idea of entrepreneurship or capitalism, the idea is that you're offering something to people and people are accepting it, and that's how you get rewarded, by selling products or services. But what he's selling, no one wants. And so only way you can get across is like through this subterfuge and with these nonprofits and in coordination with governments.
Yeah, I mean, Gates is apparently a very shrewd businessman. So He was in the right place, the right time. He put together $100 billion, but I don't think he knows what to do with it, which is why he's handing it off to other people to dissipate through charities. Like, he's fighting malaria. Okay, nobody likes malaria. It's not a fun thing, but he spent many, many millions of dollars in Africa giving people
Nets,
nets.
yes, the sleeping
sleep
nets are on
under.
their beds, yeah.
Yeah, and the Africans prefer not to use them. They use the nets for other things. So Gates was wasting money by doing that. Look, if you want to make the world a better place, don't shuck off your responsibility by making it the duty of some bureaucracy that you set up to give away money and corrupt people. And this is not the right way. To me, the only way that you can make the world a better place by giving away money is by not giving it away. I like the idea of making a loan to somebody who seems worthy of the loan. So you give him X amount of money for X purpose. And if he does that, he gives it back to you, and you can, as they say, pay it forward because the capital still exists. And if not, you're dealing with probably a bad apple. So you can drive on, but that's the way to do things. So you personally take responsibility for it, as opposed to shunting it off to a bureaucracy, which will become self-sustaining and counterproductive. Because most of these charitable bureaucracies and NGOs actually destroy the so-called objects of their love by cementing poor people to the bottom by giving them free stuff. It's like, every once in a while, the Ethiopians or some other group are starving. So we ship plane loads of food there. Well, that seems like a good idea. They're not starving anymore for the moment. But the problem is that Ethiopians always had farmers. And when you ship all this food in there, it destroys the market and it becomes totally uneconomic for the farmers to grow food to sell. Now you've just made the problem worse by keeping these indigent people alive for another year.
Right. Yeah. And that's what people, but if you put all the farmers out of business, then basically they can't adapt and make sure that they are supplying the market. And now their welfare queens are totally dependent on that food aid basically every year thereafter. There's no market.
And now you need more food aid. So this is great for the NGO. I mean, the people that are running, they have purpose to their life. Get money to find food to ship to these people every year, further destroying their lives. It's absolutely insane.
It is insane. It is insane. So just
it's the same, actually. This sounds so cold-hearted, so hard-hearted to say this, but it's the same with medicines, where populations are stable, they're normal, because a lot of the people die of diseases. I say, well, can't have people dying of diseases. That's terrible. Well, it is terrible. But so you ship a bunch of medicines in there and the population explodes because now people aren't dying anymore. The way to solve the problem is for the people to solve the problem themselves.
Yes.
Not to, have some outside force like medicines, which will make their populations grow, and then they all move into sweltering cities. And,
these are super complex systems, and the simple answers that outsiders, can feel good about offering to those complex systems basically corrupt them and destroy them, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Solutions always have to come from within, I think. Whether you're talking about an individual, solutions to your personal problems have to come from you. They can't come from alcohol from outside or drugs from outside to make your head work better, or free
even
money.
A rich uncle, right? Even a rich uncle. Solve your problems. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same thing. So, and it's the same with countries. So this is why foreign aid is so destructive. makes me ask, where did that $150 billion, that's a lot of money in a short period of time, where did it go in the Ukraine? That's like, was it like pouring a quart of water into the Sahara Desert and you wonder where it went? Well, I'm sure it went into a lot of people's pockets. I mean, Zelensky's going to emerge a billionaire from this thing. All the cronies around him will emerge billionaires. And, you know, hundreds of thousands of people are dead, partially, in fact, mostly because of the US giving $150 billion to God knows where it went. It'll never be accounted for. There'll never be an accounting of exactly where that money went. It'd be too embarrassing. So this is the same with charities of all kinds. They're stupid, they're destructive, not always ill-intentioned, but
No, I think they're often good intentioned.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Exactly, that's right. It's just unwise. It's unwise, but it's good intentions. I mean, you know, I think that most Americans who supported, Ukraine basically were, I think they generally wanted, to make sure that the bad guy was not attacking them, or attacking this, other country, but they don't, but by supporting that side so blindly, it's resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of young men. A generation of young men in Ukraine are gone. And you can blame Russia for that. Sure, Russia's part of it. Russia's obviously bad, but it's by being a do-getter and intervening in that, it actually has cost hundreds of thousands of more lives, and there's much more destruction. So it's not good.
You're right. It's the US, and it is the US basically, by sticking its nose into that. And what's basically a border war between two shithole countries. And the argument for Russia having invaded, I don't approve of, and nobody should approve of one country invading another. That's, bad thing. We can all agree on that. But the fact is that Russia was massively provoked. And we can go into a whole thing about how was Russia provoked and how did this actually get out of control the way it did.
It was probably for do-gooder reasons, Doug. It's probably us people trying to do good again.
Trying to do good again, right? And then the average guy, not knowing anything about the history of the area or the background of the conflict and how it really started, says it's got to be the Russians' fault because they're the ones that actually invaded. Yeah, they shouldn't have invaded. That was a boneheaded move. But within the context of what they call realpolitik, yeah, it was inevitable when you provoke somebody enough. It's not like the US hasn't invaded other countries.
What are you talking about?
We invaded, I remember we invaded Panama, which was no threat to anybody, and killed, I don't know, nobody knows to this day how many Panamanians got killed in that invasion, but it was thousands, not hundreds, thousands. We invaded Grenada and killed a whole bunch of Grenadans for no good reason whatsoever. Yes, the Soviets were building a large airport in Grenada. Okay. All right. It's not like the Soviet Union, which was a very bad thing, incidentally, I hasten to add. It wasn't surrounded by lots of really big US bases around it. So we invade all kinds of places promiscuously, but it's okay because God's on our side.
That's right. I mean, again, it just comes back to when you interject simple solution into very complex systems, you just send it off kilter and it spirals out of control, like a gyroscope losing its balance or something.
Yeah. I'm still asking myself, is this dust up in the Ukraine going to turn into World War III? Should have been just a little border war, but this can get totally out of control at this point.
So yeah, we haven't talked about this in a while, actually. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it now. Now this kill box of Bakhmut is taken over now finally by Russia. Lots of dead on both sides, but mostly Ukrainians in there. And Zelensky hasn't even been in the country recently. There's something about his defense minister might be dead or in the hospital. I don't know. I mean, we're going to send them F-16s apparently. What?
You know, that's here. It's like two sides are fighting. Let's give the one side stuff that'll help kill even more people and make the other side even angrier, so that they have to ramp things up to counter the F-16s. I mean, it's just completely insane. It's bankrupting the U.S., hoping in the process of hoping to bankrupt Russia and using dead Ukrainians to do the dirty work. You'd think that the average Ukrainian would say, wait a minute, I don't like being a pawn in a game that the US is playing. This is crazy.
Well, something like 15 million, roughly, Ukrainians have left Ukraine. You know, they're, I guess, refugees for all intents and purposes. You know, certainly the ones with resources left and are elsewhere right now.
And I don't know what the numbers are, and nobody knows, because the numbers, if anybody knows, won't be released. But most of the Ukrainian army are draftees. I mean, that's why you can't get out of, you couldn't get out of the Ukraine if you were a military age male. They wanted to put you in a uniform and use you as cannon fodder.
Yep. You know what? One thing real quick with this, with F-16, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist, of course, but with the, you know, the F-16 is, you know, it's like a 40-year-old, 45-year-old aircraft. And the Air Force, you know, and everybody wants to replace them with F-35s. Well, and I mean, if you're Raytheon, I think that's who makes it. I'm not sure, makes the F-35. And you want to, you know, encourage development that you really should get rid of these old, but still very serviceable F-16s that populate the world. You know, if you send the surplus of those into for destruction, then everyone will have to rearm with a brand new F-35.
And those F-35s cost a lot of money to run, like $20,000 an hour to run.
And the readiness of them is much lower. Like the readiness, the percentage of availability, and it can be in service time of that aircraft is something like, I don't know, it's like a third less than the F-16 is. So.
Yeah, it's just what the Ukrainians need is a bunch of high maintenance, very expensive to maintain equipment that it's going to take a long time to train their pilots and tank drivers and mechanics and the infrastructure to do all this stuff. This is it's all non-productive. It's all destructive.
It is all, well, that's war. That's war, right? That's the only way war is.
It's just completely insane. Well, it's because, you know, most of the world is run by governments these days. That didn't used to be the case 100 years ago. Governments were a dangerous nuisance, but now they control everything in the world. And of course, well, why are governments so stupid? Well, it's because the type of people that get into government are people that like to boss other people around. But where do they get these ideas? Well, they go to schools, government schools that inculcate people. You know, I'm afraid human nature itself is a problem. There are no solutions to the problem, but everything that's going on in the world today makes things worse. Not that they'd be perfect if all these horrible things we've talked about disappeared. I mean, we're still dealing with the naked ape, crazy chimpanzees, but having crazy chimpanzees with nuclear weapons and biological weapons and cyber weapons, that's not wise.
No, but I think, but the solution to it all is, like you said, because of the nature of man, is dangerous. But I think that isn't fundamentally like something I've heard you say about Trump, that his problem is he lacks a philosophical core. And it seems to me you can extrapolate that to society at large. There's no philosophical core. And without philosophical core, things spiral, you know, through basic incentives. They end up spiraling out of control to where we are today.
Yeah, I don't think Trump has any real idea of right and wrong. He's got a gut feel. He relies on his gut, but it's not thought out. It's not rational. I don't think he looks down the road. He's not a chess player. He's a checkers player. Okay. So
3D checkers. It's 3D checkers.
Oh, that's right. He was supposed to be playing 3D checkers. I mean, that's suppose that's easier than playing 3D chess.
Much easier.
It's too bad that the answer from the Republican side seems to be, Trump, who's vastly better than Biden, it seems to me, just because he's against, on a gut level basis. People forget that he wanted to be, he was equally willing to be a Democrat when he first broached the idea of running back, and I think it was 2012. He had to decide whether he wanted to be a Democrat or Republican. Not that there's all that much difference between the two parties, but even back then, the Democratic Party was manifestly corrupt and had all the values that we see coming into full blossom today. So Trump said, yeah, I could be a Democrat. So, yeah, he's a better alternative than Biden, certainly. I mean, unquestionably. But am I going to go out and vote for Trump? Well, I don't believe in voting to start with, so that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. We gave people a lot to chew on. And you guys have comments or feedback about this? We covered a lot of territory. I'd be very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Do you like us talking about this wide range of topics? And if so, if there's a place you'd like us to focus in future episodes, leave it in the comments. And we'll leave it there, Doug, and we'll talk again later this week.
Thanks, Matt.